Welcome back. We're going to spend it's not going to take long, but just a couple of minutes talking about kind of the tail end of Arrow's article. And when he gets into he talks a few minutes about the competitive model under certainty, and then he talks about the competitive model under uncertainty. So when he's talking about the competitive model under certainty, he's talking about non-marketable commodities. So he talks about public health to welfare to communicable diseases. And so he's talking about the commodities, especially with communicable diseases, is they're not really marketable commodities. It's the certainty and they're concerned about, at least in the late 50s and early 60s, concerned about how do you handle the public health aspect of it? How do you handle the welfare aspect of it? And under competitive model under certainty, there's increasing returns for the physicians up to a point. So this was again late 50s, early 60s. So there were some increasing returns, but only up to a point. So it was really difficult on at least healthcare providers in that time period. Again, we're talking about we're talking about 60 years ago. So there was definitely an issue for some healthcare providers as they tried to manage the business of providing healthcare. And he's talking about restrictions to entry. Remember, under the competitive model, it should be easy entry, easy exit. He gets into the restrictions to entry by the AMA. Medical schools are trying to limit the supply, and in limiting the supply, the theory, I think, at that point in time, it's going to drive the income a little higher. So it increases the income for providers because they were afraid if they didn't increase the income for providers, these individuals with these so-called brilliant minds would end up going into other professional fields. They might go into business, may want to be a stockbroker, may want to be a lawyer. So there were other professional fields at that time that were competing dollar-wise for the individuals that could have been going to medical school. And then he gets into the pricing piece. And then again, we talked about there was, in the competitive model, there is complete information about pricing in the market. But the pricing, at least at that point in time, they talked about closed panels, objection to prepay pricing, financial risk transfers with the rich compensating the healthcare community for indigent population. So you had all of these factors that were, kind of derailing the competitive market at that point in time, because if you've ever been in a closed panel, you can only see providers that are within that panel. So it's not like a PPO where you can go to see whomever you want to, as long as you pay the fee to go see them. So they were taking it had closed panels, and it limited the ability for physicians to kind of reach outside those panels. And it was just not at least in Arrow's view, it just was not the best situation for physicians at that point in time. And then he flips the competitive model and talks about it on uncertainty. And under uncertainty, it's the risk of becoming ill, the incomplete recovery, and the loss of productivity. And let's stop and think about that for just a few minutes. So, there is uncertainty and risk associated with an individual becoming ill. So that's number one. Number two, it's the efficacy of treatment and recovery. So you can have, complete recovery on one end of the tail and incomplete recovery on the other end of the distribution, and all levels of recovery in between. So when they talk about recovery, it's not just the full recovery, it's how long it takes you to recover. Because as you are recovering from whatever your episode of care is, what's it going to impact? How's it going to impact not only your productivity and your ability to earn income? How's it going to impact or constrain your company's ability to generate products and to maximize productivity. And then he talks about, maximizing the expected value of the utility function. And in the physician's viewpoint, it's income. How that's their utility, that's their satisfaction. And so they are talking about how do the physicians maximize that income, maximize the revenue they receive from seeing individuals. And then he launches into opportunities to kind of mitigate, I guess you could say, uncertainty. And he talks about, individuals are risk averse. Then he gets into insurance. He talks about some welfare and social gain. And then he moves into the pooling of risk. And that's what happens when you have an insurance plan. They are pooling risk, and they are determining a premium that they're going to charge to either you directly, or they're going to charge to your employer. And that is an actuarial derived premium based on pooling risk. And then he launches into the actuarial kind of the excess premiums. And so under this excess premium, let's say the actuarial derived amount is $100, and the premium for you for a month to your employer group may be $125. That difference between 125 and 100, or the $25, is buried in administrative costs. It's buried in the administrative cost of taking the individual's information, loading the individual's information into a system. When the claim comes in, it's processing that claim, making sure the individual is still covered under the insurance plan, making sure the benefits all match up. And so you've got all these administrative costs sitting out there. And then you're also offsetting some of the financial risk that is transferred from buyer to seller. You're offsetting some of that risk through copays and deductibles and coinsurance and things like that. So, and then, kind of the last couple of bullets, or a couple of talking points, he gets into moral hazard. He talks about physician impact, alternative payments, and then he comes back to the closed panels, looking at third-party control. When he thinks about third-party, mostly talking about health plans or government-type agencies. And then he gets into administrative cost, predictability in insurance, again, actuarially derived premiums, pooling of unequal risk, and then he looks at gaps in coverages. So, I mean, he's hitting on a lot of issues that had impacted medical care in the late 50s and early 60s. And some of these issues, while we have devised fairly sophisticated ways of transferring financial risk, you're still somewhat impacted by some of these issues, again, because of the uncertainty of an episode of care occurring. And again, that's where he deals on this to tie it all together. He still goes back to, so Arrow's talking about uncertainty of treatment effects, ideal insurance, expected utility, trust and delegation. He's kind of hammered on physicians. Some of them, there could be an issue of trust because of the asymmetric information between consumers and healthcare providers. And then he finally touches on licensing and education standards. And I think the reason that this was a required reading, not only at Ohio State, but a lot of graduate schools at the time I was working on my PhD, was because it kind of opened people's eyes with respect to how the models within economics, how the factors that drive like competitive markets and the supply and demand curve, how it could be somewhat different in the healthcare environment than it is in other market economies. And it was interesting reading back then. It'd been a while since I'd read it, but I wanted to provide an opportunity. There'll be it's an article that, reach out to me if you want a copy. I've loaded a copy onto the system for you. And it's just an interesting read. So, and lastly, before we get into working on the text and getting into chapter 1, there'll be another set of videos for this kind of introductory into healthcare, and kind of the way that things may have progressed from the late 50s, early 60s to what they look like now, and in the early 2020s. So I will start that probably later today, and we'll touch base soon. Thank you.